Nervous now.
So well done, Rachel. I thought you might be nervous, so I brought my Lucky Charm. I do have my Herschel Walker badge, which means we automatically win without saying too much.
That means we, by definition, cannot get in trouble.
That's right.
We are the law. Okay.
Yeah, we've lucked out. So welcome back. It's good to be with you again. Thank you for wearing your sneakers. It just makes us all feel more comfortable. I buy my speakers every 11 years just for you. So
it means also that, if the lights go out, I can find my feet in the dark.
You guys are always ready in journalism. I want to pick up with your reading on Henry Ford. He is a shocking example of leaders pushing the public towards fascism, but it takes a public that's ripe for it, say from grievances from inequality or cultural change. What did you learn that might explain today's public support for Trump?
History doesn't repeat. It recurs a little bit, there's patterns, but it's never exactly the same thing. And I don't think there's any analogy in modern life to the Germany under the Nazis, right? From 1933 to 1945. There's nobody who's a Nazi other than a Nazi. There's nobody who's Hitler other than Hitler. But there's all sorts of different types of fascists and authoritarians. And I wanted to read that piece about what Ford blamed Jews for, because I think it actually does give us some insight. Here's a man who is an industrial titan, who's got probably the best brand name of any brand name in the world, who runs this gigantic motor company, who's acclaimed as an industrial, as a member of the pantheon of industrial world history. And he's worried about Jew metal in his Model T and thinks that somehow baseball is being ruined by Jewish people. The pettiness and the ridiculousness of it is one thing, but it also shows you that that sort of conspiratorial thinking doesn't have to come from a place of want or powerlessness. It comes from a place of laziness, which is that I do not want to bother to understand complex systems. I would prefer to pick a convenient enemy and blame them for everything. And so it's tactical. It does, whether or not the people who, when I was growing up, before I started doing this research, I should say, as an adult, I knew that Henry Ford was prejudiced. I knew that he was personally anti-Semitic, but I just thought it was kind of a vice. I thought it was something personal about him. I didn't realize his role as a global propagandist for this stuff and its effect. But I think it's important to recognize both its psychological thrills and its political function. It makes you feel like everything makes sense and everything is simple now. And also that nothing that you might do constructively as a citizen is worth it. And that combination of the kind of dopamine that you get from being told that you're in on the secret, and also that you cannot constructively make manifest anything that you want in the world because the secret cabal is in control, the only thing you can do is try to root out the cabal. That's a very dangerous thing, and both sides of that accelerate over time.
When the former president was convicted by 12 normal jurors, I got more hopeful thinking about normal citizens you profiled in your book. If 12 normal jurors can see through the noise, American normal voters can see through the noise too.
Yeah.
How do you see it?
I've never felt normal, so I gotta, never felt like a normal person. Who here has, anybody here feel median? I don't know, and everybody's a weirdo in their own way. With that caveat, I will say, going back to some of that the sort of benefit, the psychological impact of these conspiracy theories, One of the things that I'm working on right now in Ultra Season 2 is a conspiracy theory about, again, Jewish Americans that took hold in the United States Senate after World War II. And the thing that's bizarre about it, it had a lot of political consequences, and it sustains this whole drama for all of Ultra Season 2, and I hope you'll listen. But the other thing that's weird about it is that the conspiracy theory is kind of like QAnon level weird. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the sort of the details of what the QAnon conspiracy theory involves, but it's a horror movie, right? It's not just, oh, there's a secret cabal of people who are plotting things for their own benefit against the rest of us. It's lurid, it is violent, it is, it's like satanic, it's got all, it's bloody, and it's like an action movie, right? Like somewhere between an action movie and a horror movie. And when conspiracy theories evolve, they tend to evolve in a way that is divorced from the facts, so they don't need to be constrained by things that actually happen. And they tend to follow the path of most excitement, whatever gets people's juices flowing the most. And you get into a cycle once you've bought in a little bit, once you've decided, okay, there isn't a real government, instead there's a cabal and George Soros is whatever. Once you've bought into that, you start craving more and more of that revelation dopamine, and more of that illicit thrill of learning this transgressive knowledge, that stuff that you're not supposed to know. And these conspiracy theories always go into these dark, bloody, sometimes sexualized, like lurid, literally unbelievable directions. And that has always been the case. And I didn't really know that about the kind of parallels to the QAnon stuff before I started looking into it. But it made me realize finally, like, oh, this is why we have that feeling of Earth 1 and Earth 2. Because on Earth 1, if you are told something crazy about somebody in America doing a crazy thing, you would like a fact to base that on. So a little bit of evidence, I don't know, a link perhaps. Something. And if you don't have that, then you don't believe the crazy assertion. But on Earth 2, there's no using facts and there's no using evidence because it's all secret. We're not allowed access to the real facts. And for them, the conspiracies get weirder and weirder and weirder. And it's not just that there were ballots we didn't expect in Fulton County, there's a dead Venezuelan dictator and an Italian military satellite, and it goes crazy. And it's because the emotional energy on the conspiratorial side of it drives you toward crazier and crazier and crazier things, while it is getting more and more emotionally exciting to the people who believe it. And so on Earth 1, we're both bored and bewildered. On Earth 2, they believe, and they are increasingly devoted to the weirder and weirder and weirder stuff they are hearing, to the point where it makes them hard to function in regular life and regular politics. They're so excited and so gratified by what they are learning because it feels secret and true. And that is a recipe for a cleave in society that's very hard to bridge. That's why people who are in the QAnon cult lose their families, and why people in families lose their QAnon family members. And it's a tragedy, and it's awful. But it's driven by, I think, the psychological rewards of those kinds of terrible political tactics.
I have some audience questions, people who are not feeling normal.
Yay!
And I'm going to roll them all into one. They're all panicky. This is group therapy stuff. Okay.
This is a big group for group therapy.
Yeah. Harriet asks, if Trump wins, should we leave the U.S.? Mimi asks, if Trump wins, how are you and your MSNBC colleagues protecting yourselves? And Bob asks, how do you keep sane?
All versions of the same question, I suppose. First of all, if you're feeling worry about what's going to happen in the country, it's not an irrational thing. And don't spin yourself into a worse place by feeling bad about the fact that you're feeling worried. It's okay to feel worried. That said, don't feel worried alone. If you didn't come here with somebody tonight, maybe one of the people who you said hi to who's sitting near you is somebody you might introduce yourself to and talk to more. I think especially, I've done lots of book tour events and speaking engagements. I've tried to go to as many red states as I could. I think people living in states that have Republican-dominated legislatures, as the Republican Party is getting really Trump-dominated. In particular, I am hearing from people a lot of despair, but I am also hearing that people's civic lives are waking up. This is not a time to live inside your phone. This is not a time to, It's not a time to just watch MSNBC, although please watch MSNBC. This is a time to make sure you know your neighbors and get in touch with family members who you're out of touch with. And if you don't have a book club, it's a good time to have a book club. And if there is a candidate who you support or an issue that you support that is going to be on the ballot, it is time. Don't think about doing it for the fall, you have to do it now. And you will, and I say that not only because of any likely electoral effect that will have. I don't know who your chosen candidates are. I say that because participating in a shoe leather activity, or at least an activity where you are calling people on the phone who you don't already know. I know sometimes people phone bank that way. Anything where you are actively trying to have an impact on what is going to happen in your country is going to be both good for your country and good for you. The cure to despondency is action. And so I would encourage you to find something to do. And the more worried you are, the more urgency I would put into trying to join something, to meet people, to make sure that you're connecting. And if you're not a joiner, and if you're shy, and if you're introverted, try to connect just to the people who are already in your own life, who maybe you're only seeing through texts. Maybe try calls. If you're only connecting with people through calls, maybe try meeting up. It's a good time to make personal connections. So I would say that for one. In terms of leaving the country, you do you. Nobody, I think, in good faith is going to tell anybody not to do something that they feel like they need to do to protect themselves and their family. But if it was up to me to give advice in such a moment, and clearly it's not, I would say your country needs you right now.
I'd like to get to your book. I just can't wait to ask this question. It begins with an aspiring...
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Want to use this? You guys can't... Should we switch to... We have these other mics. Should we try those? Is it just Randall you can't hear, or is it me too? Both of us. Oh.
Both? Can you hear me now? No? Hear me now? Okay, thanks. Got a very democratic audience here.
Yeah.
These people are into action. Thank you for your help. So let's get to your book. It begins with an aspiring Nazi who has a big footprint in Houston, the renowned architect Philip Johnson. With several buildings in town, I quote from your book, Johnson's assistant said, quote, he speculated he might end up being the American Hitler, that he felt the fate of this country rested on his shoulders. Could you share that story? I mean, it's just so unbelievable. It just still shakes me up.
So Philip Johnson, this is not a secret story, but given the number of people who know him for his architecture, the ratio between that and the number of people who know him for his fascism feels uncomfortably large. I feel like, know him for his architecture, but also know the fascism. Let's just, so Philip Johnson was a very rich young man who fell in love with Nazism very early on. He loved in particular the aesthetics of it. The opening scene with Philip Johnson in the book includes him at a big Hitler rally in Germany. He came back to the United States and sought first to find America's Hitler, and then ultimately to maybe try to be America's Hitler himself. Luckily, nobody liked him and nobody was willing to follow him anywhere. But he first attached himself to Huey Long, the legendary governor and senator from Louisiana, fully convinced that, as many people in Huey Long's day were convinced, that he would be America's dictator. Huey Long was described in non-hyperbolic terms in his day as heading up a dictatorship in the state of Louisiana. And I sort of make the case in the book that I think that was fair. FDR most feared running for re-election against Huey Long because he thought that Long was such a talented demagogue. And he feared the sort of rising tide of dictatorship and authoritarianism around the world. He thought if Long made a full force run for the presidency in 1936, FDR expected to lose to him. Huey Long never did that. He was assassinated in 1935. But the fact that Philip Johnson took himself from New York, bought a bunch of guns, designed a new pennant for his new fascist political party, and drove himself to Louisiana to attach himself to Huey Long tells you something about how people thought it was really possible to do it here. After Long died, he then Philip Johnson attached himself to Father Charles Coughlin, who was the most influential media figure of his day, and I would argue the most influential and most listened to right-wing American political figure, media figure ever in the history of the country. Coughlin had like 30 million people listening to him weekly at a time when we did not have 200 million people in the country. And he was preaching that his followers should form themselves into armed fascist platoons to go wage war against the US government to fight the Jews and the communists. It was really radical and really, really popular, which is a bad combination. When Johnson attached himself to Coughlin, he brought back to the United States, to a parade venue in Chicago, some of the aesthetic and architectural detail that he'd so admired at this Potsdam rally that he went to and saw Hitler speak at. And he tried to build Charles Coughlin a backdrop for speaking at that rally that was a Hitler-worthy, Leni Riefenstahl-worthy backdrop. And luckily, again, Philip Johnson kind of sucked and didn't pull it off. And Father Coughlin's Coughlin was Canadian, so he couldn't run for the presidency himself, but he was running kind of a puppet guy for the presidency in 1936 after Huey Long had been killed. He picked another guy. Philip Johnson was supporting him, built him this Hitler backdrop to try to have these amazing rallies, and it all petered out, thank God. But Philip Johnson was a true believer. He only really recanted when it seemed like he was going to get arrested for sedition. He was so wealthy and so well connected that his family interceded directly with, I believe it was the Secretary of the Navy, to give him kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card from sedition, and after that, he kept his nose clean.
The story that astounded me most, the curiosity of an advertising man, like me, uncovered a Nazi plot involving over 24 congressmen and senators taking money and direction from the Nazis. Can you share that, please?
So we're talking about a guy named Henry Hoke. And Henry Hoke is not a famous person. You're not supposed to know who he is. Although I would love to make him famous with this book. The great thing about Henry Hoke is that he was a nobody guy. He was a regular citizen. Like, you think about American heroes and people who saved the country from fascism, and you kind of imagine like Iwo Jima, you know what I mean? Like, you imagine like guys in uniforms. Or tough guys, or at least people who were like really brave and crusaders. Henry Hoke was a totally dorky, unfashionable, nebbishy ad guy. And his specialty was direct mail advertising. He was like a trade expert in, I think, like the insert cards that you put in magazines and stuff. Like, this was not a Marine general. And he did have this area of expertise, though, and his son went to UPenn, went to University of Pennsylvania, and not long after he had been at UPenn, he called his dad and said, I want to come home. I don't like it at school. And his dad said, why? And he said, well, I don't like the political atmosphere. For one, we get this stuff shoved under our doors and our dorms every day. And it's fascist, it's pro-German, and it's anti-Semitic, and it's, I'm not into it. I don't like it here. And Henry Hoke went and visited his son and looked at the material, talked to some other dads who had some kids in other schools, talked to some professors at Penn, started looking around and realized, you know what? I might actually be the American hero for this moment. Because I am an expert in direct mail advertising, and this is direct mail advertising for fascism. This propaganda is well produced. I can tell how it's being produced. I can tell you from the quality of the paper and the way that it is targeted and the education level of the language in it and where it's turning up. He started realizing this was not just on college campuses. This stuff was turning up in dentist offices, insurance agents, government offices. All sorts of places were all getting this material that was very specifically targeted to where it was going. And he traced it to its source. This inchoate, it's coming from nowhere, like anonymous Twitter post feel of where is all this stuff from, he figured out where it was from, in part by tracing some of the addressing machines that had been used to put the labels on the material that was being mailed out. He recognized the typeset of the addressing machines. He knew it was a sort of out-of-date machine. He knew there were only 3 still at work in the United States. He could account for 2 of them, and then he found the 3rd, and then he figured out who was sending it. And what he had discovered was a multi-million-dollar Nazi propaganda operation targeting the United States, run by the Berlin Foreign Office. It was the largest Nazi propaganda operation anywhere in the world outside Germany. And if you followed him a little bit further down the path, he then turned his direct mail advertising trade publication into like a scoop machine, like expose every week with what he had discovered. And ultimately where this led was to 24 members of Congress and United States senators who were working with a Nazi agent to send this stuff from the Foreign Office in Berlin, to send it out to the American people, not just through the direct mail stuff that he had discovered, but through their congressional offices, which meant they could send it out with no postage. Congressional franking, all billed to the American taxpayer. The copies, the envelopes, the postage, all paid for by the US government. And Henry Hoke exposed that because he was a dork. And he had this very specific area of expertise. You never know when your skills are going to be called upon by your country. You're thinking, what do I have to offer? My training is in English as a second language instruction. My training is in childcare. My training is as a nurse. My training is as a college professor in some obscure form of engineering. You know what? If Henry Hoke can unravel that, you never know. Your country needs you. Our country needs all of us.
Another audience question. Don asks, why haven't these big stories in fascism in America been told before?
I have changed my mind. Well, no, I have broadened my thoughts about this recently because of this new thing that I'm working on. Because for a long time, I thought this story that's in Prequel, that was touched on in Ultra Season 1, I thought that I had found the big story about fighting fascism in modern American history that we'd forgotten about. And so I thought all my answers when I'd been asked things like this and before were really specific to this story. Oh, well, you know, the senators who were implicated put pressure on the Justice Department to drop the case, and the president was friends with one of the senators who was in trouble, and so he ordered the Justice Department's evidence to be submarined, and the judge died in the trial, and so there was a mistrial. Like, I had all these answers to this that was very specific to this story. Then I started working on another one of them. And Ultra Season 2 is about another one of these stories, about a real authoritarian threat linked to foreign dictatorships abroad, where sitting members of Congress, people with a lot of political power, are implicated, and brave, totally forgotten Americans stand up to them and kind of stop them in the nick of time. And so now I'm worried that I've found a trend. I'm hoping there isn't going to be a season 3 of Ultra. I'm hoping it's just these two. But the commonality is that it's not really in anybody's interest, I think, to tell these stories. If you were the member of Congress who got caught working for a Nazi agent, you don't want this story told. If you were the Nazi agent, this is not the most important thing that happened in your life in the last 80 years. And if you were the Americans who fought them, I think we're disinclined to hear these stories because we know how it works out, right? We're still here. We're still a republic. We're still a democracy. They didn't get us. And so looking back on stories like that retrospectively, that makes us think like, oh, maybe it wasn't such a big deal. But you go back and you look at this stuff contemporaneously, and you see these 4-inch headlines on the front page of every paper in the country in January 1940 about Coughlin's Christian Front militia being arrested for sedition, and the piles and piles of explosives that they had, and the plans they had to murder 12 congressmen, starting with the Jews, and the bombs they planned to set off a violent revolution, starting in New York City and in other major cities where they had the National Guard sort of primed to help out once it would go. And you see, head of the FBI himself showing up at the press conference to announce that these arrests had happened. And you see the country absolutely convulsed with worry over these things. You see the sedition trial, these 30 defendants brought in, and the Justice Department laying out the evidence, not just that they wanted a fascist dictatorship here, but that they were working in cahoots with the Nazi government that we were fighting in the war at the time. And you see the national freakout about it. And you realize, you know what? The fact that we know it ended up okay and we survived as a country is not the whole truth of this. The whole truth of this has to include how dangerous it was in the moment, and therefore how crucial it was that Americans worked to stop it. And that is where we are now. Because I fully believe that there will not be an authoritarian takeover of the United States government. I fully believe that we will keep our democracy. But I know it is not inevitable. I know it will only happen because Americans will stand up for it. And so we need to learn these stories about how important, risky, brave, and interesting, honestly, it can be to fight these fights. We need to know that people who went before us did this, and that's why we have the republic that we have today, because we're the next generation that has to do what they did.
So I have a Texas question. You've discussed the red flags for noticing encroaching fascism, and one of them is going after scapegoats. And here in Texas, we have a government that's scapegoating immigrants, blacks and browns, LGBTQ folks, and more. What is your advice for Texans?
I would never deign to give Texas advice. I know Texas well enough to know that. Let me, if you don't mind, if I turn it back to you. Where do you look for hope? Where do you see silver linings? Where do you see people doing good work against that in Texas?
I see hope in that, and I do see hope. I think Democrats realize the situation is urgent. Winning a statewide office seems to be the main thing. The last time that happened was 1994. I think Colin Allred, he's already close. And to be this close, this far out for election, I think is good reason for hope.
Electoral politics are important. Electoral politics are how we get power in this country, and that's the way it should be. It's not the only form of power, though, and scapegoating works by excusing the people who have power from having to deliver, because you can always excuse your incompetence by blaming the cabal, by blaming the enemy within, by blaming these secretly powerful people who we all want to dislike as being the real reason that things are bad. And I think it's helpful to know that as a political tactic, because I actually think that the vast majority of people, once they understand that a political tactic is being used on them, nobody likes to be used, nobody likes to have their chain yanked. We were talking before about the sort of normal voter, the sort of median person, and I think when you debunk conspiracy theories, or try to, when you criticize people for out of bounds, inhuman, indecent, ungentlemanly behavior in the public sphere, when you report that people are lying, when you tell the truth about the way things really are, you are likely not going to reach people who are committed partisans of the side that is trying to get one over on people. But you are ultimately, if you are persistent and responsible about that, you are ultimately going to reach reasonable people. And you will move the reasonable center. And there is a reasonable center. And the average voter, right? There's no such thing as an average voter, so I'll say the median voter, is a person who's not an extremist of any kind, and who may be entertained by or momentarily seduced by different forms of extremism. But if they see that there is something being offered to them in politics that isn't conspiratorial, that isn't extreme, that is practical, ultimately you are making that an option that still can be chosen in your state. So I know that's an unsexy way to approach it, but working on electoral politics matters. Calling out political tactics and scapegoating as calling out scapegoating as a political tactic matters. But I would just also say one other piece of it, which is scapegoating has this political purpose. Scapegoating also ruins and risks the lives of the people who are scapegoated. And they need your help. They need your support. They need your visible support. And that is something, the more privilege you have, the more support you have to offer. And that is something that can be life-changing for the person you are offering to back up and the person you are willing to stand in front of when they come for them. It will also be life-changing for you. And so I would just say think about it in two different ways. Think about it in terms of its political power and calling it out, but also think about what you can do. If you see people in your community and in your state who are being persecuted, who are being scapegoated, who are being blamed for things that they do not need to be blamed for, figure out what you can do to show support for that community to other people who wouldn't necessarily expect that you would support them, right? I mean, I grew up in the AIDS activist movement. As you mentioned in the introduction, I was an ACT UP kid. And in the AIDS crisis, at the height of the AIDS crisis, it was very powerful for those of us in the gay community to stand up for ourselves and be heard and speak on our own terms and defend ourselves in our community. But there is nothing like the power of straight people in that moment standing up and saying, us too.
So I have an audience question with a gay question. Harriet asks, what should gay and LGBTQ folks be most worried about now?
Be most worried about? Again, I don't think anybody in good faith can tell you how to worry about your own family and your own situation. So I don't know. I don't really know the right way to answer that. I will say that the political backlash that we're in right now around gay rights, narrowly defined, right to marry, the right to have your own family the way you want to have your own family, the right to non-discrimination, those rights are very fragile. And I'm old enough to have grown up in a time when we didn't have most of those rights. And community dynamics between gay people and straight people were different because of that. Now, in an era in which we have had these rights for a little while, I feel like gay communities and straight communities are more integrated. I think to expect when straight people take away those rights that we're going to need to be taking more care of ourselves again. That's not necessarily something to worry about, but it's something to be prepared for. And I hate to say it, because I think part of me really believed that, I remember the gay marriage fights. Like, gay marriage was never really my thing. But the arguments for it was like, they were like, if gay people can get married, that's gonna ruin marriage. When gay people got married, did any straight people not get married because gay people were married? I was gonna ask you to marry me, but there are gay people who have married. Therefore, the institution has no value. So let's just date. I mean, did that ever happen? And it was such a stupid argument against gay people having equal marriage rights. And because of that, I took great comfort in that, the sort of illogic of that once gay people start getting married, then you would realize that your bad arguments against it didn't come to fruition, and that would sort of be the end of it, and we'd never go back. But it turns out things do, and they can ratchet back. Anything that can be given can be taken away. And so we take care of ourselves, and we don't count on things that could be illusory, and we look to our straight friends and allies and family members to step up for us and to stand in between the people who want to do us harm.
So another audience question. This looks like it comes from a writer. Karen asks, thank you for writing such an exciting page turner. What is your process for writing?
Ugh. I do not enjoy writing. There's nothing to learn from me on this one. The thing I really like is researching. So I basically live in a library full of Nazi books now. Which in my household, in my gay household, that's the biggest thing to worry about. There's way too many creepy books around. I don't have a good process. I find it very difficult to write. It ages me and it prevents me from thinking other more useful thoughts. So yeah, I don't know. But I'm, the process of working on current events, MSNBC stuff going on in daily news, trials and elections and primaries and debates and all that stuff, doing that while also working on something that has kind of a longer throw, that's like a bigger arc, it's a longer term story. That is what I wanted when I changed my schedule at MSNBC. So I used to do my show 5 days a week. I only do it on Mondays now. I'm sorry. But part of the reason was that I was really burning out only being able to do stuff that fits in between commercial breaks, even though I make them go a long time before that first commercial break. And so I really need this. I was realizing that I was thinking shorter thoughts and reading shorter things, and I needed to get back to reading books, doing archival research, doing original reporting, and thinking longer term arcs. And so I would have had to quit what I was doing altogether. I was really burning out, and now I feel like I could do this for a long time, so I will. Thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to say that I think this is your best book. The way you just frame these personalities is just amazing. What was the description of Huey Long? I think it was Olympian attitude, something like that.
He built himself, Huey Long built himself an apartment at the top of the state capitol so everybody could see when he was home. Like, who does that? He also got elected senator and stayed governor. Like, I almost didn't want to write that in the book, because I was like, I'm going to give somebody an idea.
Two more questions. What is next for you? So Vanity Fair reported that Steven Spielberg optioned your Ultra story on the Great Sedition trial of 1944.
Talk into the front of the microphone.
What?
Oh, there you go, like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks for the coaching. Should I repeat that? Okay. Oh, that's so much clearer. Hear it from
I'm
a
here
pro.
to help. Yeah.
Thank you. Your whole team has been fantastic. And you guys have been helpful too. Thanks for cueing me in. Vanity Fair reported that Steven Spielberg optioned your ultra story on the Great Sedition trial of 1944. If that's correct, what can you share?
Do you believe that? It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm like, I can't believe it, but it's great. So first of all, caveat. There was a stand-up comedian, I don't remember who it was, who once said, like, the rule of law when talking to a woman who is not a member of your immediate family is that unless you can actively see a baby coming out of her at that moment, do not ask her about her pregnancy. I have learned the same thing about movies. Unless you have a ticket stub in your hand and are walking into a dark room that smells like butter, there's no proof that the movie is going to exist. So, Hollywood is weird, and I don't know when a movie gets made once a movie has started to be made. There's many ups and downs things. The other thing in the movie business is that everybody at every meeting says yes to everything, and it does not mean yes. It's just the way they're nice. It's in the news business, it's no all day long. So I was I walked out of my first meeting about a movie thing and thought that I was going to be like running a studio. No, actually, they just turned you down. But everybody knows who Tony Kushner is from Angels in America. Tony Kushner is one of my heroes, and he is writing the screenplay along with Danny Strong, who's another amazing screenwriter, and they are writing it right now. And Steven Spielberg plans to direct it, and so that will become a movie at some point. It's amazing.
Well, this sedition trial, though, is really intense. I mean, all these congressmen and senators were on trial. There was no verdict. The judge died. Truman buried the report.
Yeah, it's juicy. The drama of this story is, hopefully does make it a page turner, but I also hope that it makes it a memorable story, because I want stories like this, stories about Americans confronting authoritarian and fascist threats. I want these stories to become a thing that we remember and become part of our vernacular, become not just a thing you read about once and forgot about, but a thing that we kind of keep in mind when we can consider our modern challenges. And so it helps that the stories have a lot of like action sequences and crazy twists and turns, because it makes them more fun to learn. And then once you've learned them, you remember them, and hopefully you tell other people, and it becomes part of how we think about what's in our armamentarium as a democracy to defend ourselves. You know, William Dudley Pelley went to prison for sedition. The other sedition trial defendants didn't. A bunch of those senators and congressmen were voted out of office. Henry Ford got sued for within an inch of his life for libel on some of his anti-Semitic stuff. The Anti-Defamation League and other Jewish community defense groups spied on and infiltrated some of the really violent militias and handed over their reports to law enforcement, which didn't want to hear about it. And so they went to every element of law enforcement they could over and over and over again until they found somebody who would listen. Weirdly, in the case of the seditionists who were plotting to use U.S. military weapons from U.S. armories on the West Coast to mount a violent attack on the U.S. government there, the way that was exposed is the one law enforcement entity that did want to hear about it was U.S. Navy intelligence, because Marines had been stealing machine guns to give to the silver shirts. So that interested US Navy intelligence, and they wanted to court-martial some Marines, and they did. And then they became a conduit of information. And then once the Navy was interested, then the FBI is willing to listen. So, okay, all of that stuff is all tactical in terms of how to defend our democracy. I wouldn't know any of it if I didn't know this story. And if I have to put in like car chases and fart jokes and anything else to like keep you hooked, I want to keep you hooked.
Last question. So your book came out last October. You've been touring the country. What have you learned from responses on your book tour? What are you learning about the country?
I'll give you the real answer, which is
You're always real.
I am, I guess, to a fault. At every stop, I have been asked the question that you guys asked about being worried and about what am I doing to make sure that I'm safe. And my answer is still the same. I do feel like connecting with people and making sure that you've got other human beings in your life who you regularly look in their eyes is an important thing. I mean, for one, I'll just elaborate on that a little bit. When the danger in our country is coming from people who are telling you that among us is an internal enemy that's subhuman, vermin, needs to be exterminated, right? Needs to be taken care of once and for all. When those are the kinds of words that are being used to describe our fellow Americans, we need to make sure that as a population, we've got resistance to that. And one sure way to be incapable of believing that any of your fellow Americans is subhuman is to reach them as a human, is to talk to them face to face, is to be eye to eye with people, even with people you disagree. It matters. It matters. And I am very heartened by everybody always asking me about me keeping myself safe and MSNBC folks keeping ourselves safe. That is very heartening because it means that you guys care about us and care about me, and that's really nice. But I'm no more worried about any of us on TV or any of us who, well-known liberals or whatever. I'm not any more worried about us than I am about all of us. And we're already seeing, it's not hypothetical, we're already seeing what it is for people to be personally threatened by this movement. We see it in Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. We see it in Fani Willis. We see it in Stormy Daniels wearing a bulletproof vest into the courthouse, right? And we saw it obviously on January 6th, but we see it with all of the members of the January 6th investigatory committee in Congress needing 24-hour security. The terroristic violence against the opposition, against journalists, against anybody who's standing in their way has begun. And that means that the response to it must begin. And the people who are being targeted need standing up for. And I don't think there's any reason to worry about famous people any more than there is to worry about all of us. But it means that the responsibility is also on all of us to stand up for the people who are already being targeted, to back them up, to fund their defense funds, right? To fund their legal defense funds, to stand up and make sure there's a political cost to people who attack them in a way that is not called for. I've been hearing over and over again that there is this fear. I think we're afraid of something that we imagine is coming. Fear of the unknown is always more disabling than fear of the known. It is worth worrying about what we've got right now as a country, but it's not some distant thing we have to anticipate it. We're living in it now, and that means we can act now. And whatever you find to be wrong in your country right now, and you find to be worrying about how people are being treated and targeted, figure out a way to help them. Action is the cure to despair.
So I have a gift for you, and I think you should open it yourself. It's a surprise.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm nervous.
Good. Well, I've got my Herschel Walker badge still, you know.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Rachel Maddow, the Progressive Forum, June 13, 2024, Houston, Texas. These, do they come with a Bible?
Oh, well, you'll have to come back for that.
Randall, thank you very much. This is fantastic. Going right on the mantle.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to wear sneakers.
Yeah.
It's the left shoe also for us liberals. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Been great. You guys have been a beautiful audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.